Who's ready to party? Kaido. Kaido is ready to party, or at the very least within this discussion series, Kaido is ready to party. Okay. Fun. So, time to discuss Onigashima for Kaido, or kind of Onigashima Part 1. We're going to do, since there's so much that Kaido is involved in with Onigashima, same thing with Momonosuke, when I get to him. With Kaido, what we're going to do is break Onigashima into 2 parts. The first part is going to be all the way from essentially when the party's kind of starting, when they're getting everything ready, all of that stuff, all the way up until when he knocks Luffy off of the top of Onigashima, off of the Skull Dome and off of the island and, down into the ocean. Wano Sea. It's not an ocean. It's the Wano Sea. Because that's like a good pausing point for him in that regard. So, into this. So when we last left, him and Big Mom had semi-solidified their alliance. They're like, okay, first we'll take over the world, find the One Piece, get rid of the Marines, all of that stuff. Then we'll kill each other, and, whoever wins is, the new ruler of the world. Okay, I guess there are worse ways to build up an alliance. I don't know. Not as friendly relationship status as what Luffy and Law had for the ninja, pirate, mink, samurai alliance, but still, it's something. Maybe not as equally, equal terms, respectful built as if Shanks and Whitebeard made an alliance. That would have been an interesting alliance. But you get the idea there. So they've set up that alliance, and it's time for the feast, for the fire festival. And what ends up happening is, of course, Kaido, one of the running things through the first part of it is Kaido is requesting that the Tobiropo go and find his son. Now, within the context of the story, when we're hearing this is the first time that we're hearing about Kaido having a child, let alone, a son, let alone any child at all. And of course, then it starts to bring up, there were so many theories going on with this at the time. With, who is Kaido's child? Is it going to be this? Is it going to be that? Are they this? Are they that? And it's one of the questions was are they even actually alive? Or is Kaido in some type of a psychosis because he's drunk? And just, imagining about having imagining that he still has a child or something like that. There were lots of theories going around about Yamato. But this is where they end up bringing in the Tobiropo, and where the Tobiropo are much more introduced. He summons King and Queen and Jack and the Tobiropo, and he's explaining to them, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go and find Yamato and bring him back here. I believe there's also an addendum to this that is, whoever finds him will be given the chance to try to challenge one of the calamities to a match to see if they can now become the new calamity, if they can take them out, essentially. And we know that Who's Who is really interested in this. We kind of also know that Drake is interested in this, mostly just because it would be really good for his cover if he went from just being a Tobiropo, which is already a very high-ranking, high-ranking level in Kaido's crew. But him going up to being one of the calamities would be even better. It would give him more influence and more control in the crew and more information and stuff like that. And so we kind of know what's going on there. This also gives us, introduction to the rest of the Tobiropo, where we've really only met Drake and Page 1 up to this point in time, and now we're getting to meet the rest of them, Black Maria, Ulti, Sasaki, and Who's Who. Or the other ones that we're all kind of getting introduced to at this point in time. And, so Kaido is he's in a festival, he's in a happy mood, he's gonna have a really big, 2 really big announcements. The first one is going to be about the Alliance, the other one we'll get to in a little bit. And he's just happy and drinking and everything else like that. And, a bunch of the other, the Tobiropo all head off. Well, all of them except Black Maria. She's just like, she's content in what her position is, and she just like stays there with Kaido to like, serve him and I guess flirt with him. They have an odd relationship, in all honesty. I know for a long time, for a while, until we got Black Maria's official age along with Yamato's age, there were theories that like, oh, is Black Maria, Kaido's, lover? Is she Yamato's mom? And we find out, no, she's just a year older than Yamato, so no. Although just like Kaido and Yamato, she clearly has, ancient Oni blood or ancient giant blood, as we've kind of come to learn throughout the Elbath arc. And I'll address this now, just because of how this lands in regards to like stuff for the chapters. I'm recording this semi in the middle of the Herald flashback, and no, it's kind of been shown that like no, Kaido is most likely not Harald's son, although there is like a very similar thing, although there could be something further back. A possibility, but we don't know. He's definitely not Harald's nephew, because Harald is like stated to be like an only child, so that's why he's so spoiled at the beginning of his flashback. So there's like that regard. So no, I know that there was that theory out there that like Kaido was one of Harald's other children that was deemed a failure to a degree because he had the Oni horns and he was not, a giant child type of a thing. So there's that. Although there is always the possibility that Kaido and Harald met at some point in time, but we don't know. So Kaido's just enjoying the party. He's, drinking all the sake and eating food and all this other stuff. And we also have it where like Bao Wang shows up. I like Bao Wang. She's adorable. She's Kaido's secretary, which is just adorable that Kaido has a freaking secretary to like tell him what his schedule is. Which is just so funny. I love that. Bao Wang is just funny. And then I like that they give Bao Wang more to do. That like Kaido gave Bao Wang more to do throughout the course of the story, throughout the course of the Onigashima section. Was like acting as like one of the spies and passing on information and everything else like that. Or not spies, but security system essentially, with the Marys and everything to pass along various information and all of that stuff. So I like that they show that there. So they're going through all of that. And eventually Kaido comes out to the festival hall area, and Orochi has arrived and all of his retinue are there and everything. And, they're just, talking, and like, Kaido and Orochi are just kind of, shooting craps or whatever, shooting the bull, whatever you want to call it. Or they're just kind of talking, and, Orochi is just like, he's like, I squashed that Kozuki rebellion. They won't be showing up tonight. Plus I have a spy and all that stuff. He's just going off. And then Kanjuro shows up with Momonosuke all tied up and chucks Momonosuke onto the ground in front of Kaido, Orochi, and Black Maria. And Kaido isn't really 100% convinced that this is Momonosuke. To be fair, from Kaido's perspective, it's been 20 years since he has seen Momonosuke, and Kaido has aged those 20 years. Momonosuke has been, like, gone for, like, 6 months. From Momonosuke's perspective. But Momonosuke, given the circumstances that the last time he saw Kaido for him, those like 6, 7, whatever months ago, less than a year ago, from his perspective, from when they got sent into the future, Momonosuke handles himself fairly well, particularly with being confronted with Kaido and Orochi, two of the people who are fully responsible for what is going on in his country right now. Orochi and Kaido are both responsible for his father's death and all of that other stuff. And, so we have all of that. Yeah, Kaido's not quite convinced this is Momonosuke. He's just thinking it's just some kid that, they had pretending to be Momonosuke or something like that. Even with Kanjuro there, like, confirming it. And, like, Black Maria, actually, and I'll she just, like, kind of picks up Momonosuke and is, like, kind of, she's like, oh, you poor baby, essentially is the way that she acts, which is just kind of funny. Because then later on in the same arc, we see her beating the crap out of Sanji. I don't know. Black Maria is an interesting case. Maybe she's more gentle on children, and then she just has this habit with men. I don't know. So what ends up happening is, of course, Kanjuro does kind of warn them that, the pirate, the Alliance are on their way, but they don't really take it very seriously and everything else like that. But I just I don't remember if Kanjuro saw the rest of the fleet showing up or not. I never remember that. And he's like, yeah, they're on their way. And Kaido is just, he's kind of watching this. He's not impressed with Momonosuke. He's like, yeah, whatever. And they find that the plot failed. So, by that point in time, Luffy, Zoro, Kid, and Killer are all present. Kind of running around the festival hall at that point in time. And from there, we kind of get it where Kaido is going to be delivering his, his setup for the new Onigashima project. And in this regard, it is very much going to be, he's discussed it within his own party, within his own group, but he has not apparently given Orochi this whole setup for what his plan is. So what ends up happening is Kaido is up there giving this speech, and it's just discussing about the new Onigashima project and finding the ancient weapons and taking over, defeating the world government and the Marines and everything else like that, and aligning themselves with the Big Mom pirates to do so. And he's like, we're going to take all of those pampered, noble-born rulers and drag them off their ivory thrones down to the battlefield with us. That's what I call equality and freedom. A world where war decides a man's true worth. And, that's just his opinion on this. He's rallying his forces, giving this big speech and everything. And they're all like, yeah, Kaido. And he's revealing that essentially the new Onigashima project is to lift Onigashima up, move it over the top of the flower capital, and drop it on the flower capital. Yeah. Orochi does not like this idea because it takes away his nice, cushy home. And, yeah, he does not like that idea. I don't blame him for that. Also, you're going to squish an entire city full of people that you are then going to subsequently enslave anybody who survives and make them work for you even harder in your weapons factories, so that way you can then use them to make the weapons and work all of them until they die. And then what are you going to do? If you kill the entire population, Kaido, you have no more people to rule over. So we see that. That's Kaido's intention. And of course, Orochi just objects to this completely. He's like, no, you can't take away my castle, my kingdom, my throne. We agreed that the flower capital was mine and the rest of Wano was yours. And Kaido, just sick and tired of Orochi's bullshit after 20-something years at this point in time, just picks up King's sword and then just decapitates Orochi. Just, okay, I've run out of patience with this guy. And, yeah, I love that. He also just kind of, turns, at that point in time, he, looks out to Orochi's supporters, and are like, okay, are y'all gonna follow me, or are y'all gonna follow him to the grave? And, Fukurokuju and the other members of the, Oniwabanshu and the Mimowarigumi are just like, we swear allegiance to Kaido! It's like, we will follow you to the ends of the earth. Please don't kill us. It's essentially what ends up happening there. By the way, I love the fact that the only other member of either of these groups that we see for essentially the rest of the story arc is Fukurokuju, and he dies fighting Raizo, or supposedly dies fighting Raizo. All the rest of the members of the Mimowariguni and the Oniwabanshu, I don't think we see again, because I don't think we see them fighting alongside Kaido's forces or against the Alliance's forces during this time frame, during the rest of Onigashima. I could be wrong, but I don't recall seeing them again after that, or like even since like Momonosuke has been made shogun. I'm just like, I'm assuming they all just got the F out of Dodge and left as fast as they could, which is the smart thing to do, given the circumstances. But they're like, yeah, we support Kaido, please don't kill us. Type of a thing. So Orochi has been decapitated. Orochi's forces swear to Kaido, and then now Kaido looks over at Momonosuke. And he looks at Momonosuke, who has now been like chained up on this like crucifix type of a thing that Orochi tied him to, and was like using Momonosuke as this like, you know, I have the heir. I have Kozuki Momonosuke, son of Odin. I have him here, and I will end his life and everything else like that. Like trying to like rally up the crowd and everything else like that. And Kaido goes over to Momonosuke, who has been beaten and is chained up, and is like, okay. He's telling he's like, tell me your name. He asks him his name, and he says, and he offers to spare him if he denies being Odin's son. He's like, tell me your name, kid. And if you deny being Odin's son, then I will unchain you, and I will let you leave, and I will let you live. And he's giving him an out. And Momonosuke doesn't take the out. And this is where we see so much of this growth in Momonosuke. And I'll go over this more, obviously, when I discuss Momonosuke during this section. This section for Momonosuke. And, from Kaido's perspective, again, it's like, he's like, yeah, this kid does look like the little kid, the little 8-year-old that was crying his eyes out and everything like that I was holding over the balcony at Odin Castle 20 years ago. At Curry Castle 20 years ago. And, that little kid was just crying and blabbering for his mom. He was not a threat to me, and that's why he let Momonosuke live before. He also assumed that the fire would kill him, as I mentioned previously. And in this case, Kaido is just looking at Momonosuke, and he's like, well, this could be the same kid. That is possible. And if he is, and he truly is Odin's successor, his heir, then he is, he's a rallying point. And even if he's not really Odin's successor or heir, he's also still a rallying point because of what he represents. So Kaido is like, he's actually quite methodical about this in giving Momonosuke this out, because it's like, if he gives Momonosuke this out and if Momonosuke takes it, then he proves that, biological son of Odin or not, he does not have Odin's drive and Odin's spirit and Odin's resolve and bravery. And those are the things that Kaido fears more. And if he can get rid of this little figurehead of the rebellion by making him, deny who he is, then it's one less threat to Kaido. So that's kind of his intention here. So he gives Momonosuke the out, and Momonosuke does not take it. He says, no, I am Kozuki Momonosuke. I am the son of Odin, of Kozuki Odin. I am the rightful shogun of Wano, and he gives that whole statement and everything else like that. And this is all timed quite well, because this is when the Momonosuke gives this, this thing, and we see the different ones in the audience, Hirogoro's in the audience, Robin, Jinbei, several other members of the alliance are in the audience, and they hear Momonosuke give this is what I am. I am Kozuki Momonosuke. And again, I'll go over this more when I get to Momonosuke. And he says that, and Kaido is surprised by this, because the last time he had this kid dead to rights, the kid was just a blubbering mess. If it is the same kid, and we know from our perspective that it is the same kid, and Kaido's like, well, devil fruits exist, and with everything that I went through with rocks and everything else like that, maybe he knew that there was a time travel fruit because of Toki type of a thing. He's like, I can't take the risk, but, I'll give this kid an out. And Kaido's like, okay, he didn't take the out. He gained his father's courage in this time frame. And to be fair, Momonosuke is 8 years old. And what ends up happening is at that point in time, that is like right when the scabbards arrive. And they burst through the door onto the live stage, onto the balcony where Kaido is, and they all jump at him and attack him, stabbing him with their swords or unloading into him with like Izo and Nekomamushi with their guns and everything like that. So just doing as much damage on this initial hit as possible as they hit Kaido, and they fall, crash through the balcony, crash through the floor, and land down in like part of one of the basement areas. They then, Kaido's like, ugh, all of you guys again. And it's like, he's like kind of seeing the illusion of Odin, because like they are very much representing Odin's spirit in this regard. And he's trying to discourage them by saying that, the pirates here are just going to betray you and everything else like that. And of course, Kinemon has been through enough with Luffy and seen Luffy go through so much with Punk Hazard and with Dressrosa. And then even to a degree in Zou, and even thus far in Wano, he knows that Luffy and Law are not going to abandon them. That they are not going to get abandoned by their allies in this point in time. They have proven themselves. Kid's more up in the air, but Kinemon is like, oh, he wants revenge against Kaido too, so we're probably fine. To be fair, barring Kinemon doing something really stupid and insulting Kid or Killer, I don't think Kid or Killer would do anything against Kinemon, to be fair. So we'll give him that. But, they're like, no, that's not true. We are going to fight. They are fighting with us. They are our allies. And Kaido just is like, fine. And this is, of course, when Luffy declares war on Kaido. And Kaido then, down to the basement area, changes into his dragon form and flies up through, bashing a hole in the roof. The scabbards have like grabbed onto him as he flies through the roof and lands on the skull dome, the top of the skull dome, where Jack and Nangi and a bunch of other Kaido's forces, Jack's forces specifically, are all like up on top of the skull dome ready to fight. And Kaido kind of steps back while the Jack and the Mink tribe fight against each other and everything else like that, and Jack gets taken out. Unfortunately, he gets injured enough, and ends up, Kaido actually kind of steps in at this point in time, because bear in mind, we do not know how old Jack was when he first joined the crew. We don't know if he's a more recent addition. We don't know if he's been there for a while. But Kaido seems to at least have some type of care for Jack. And I kind of wonder, I would assume this type of care would also extend to King at the very least. Possibly Queen. And, I mean, maybe LT and Page 1, just given the background that we know about Kaido and those two, and Hanafuda. But, like, Kaido actually, like, steps in and, like, kind of, not stops the fight, because, like, Jack's forces just get defeated. And Jack gets very badly hurt, and then Kaido is like, okay, that's enough. And, like, they head off to go back into the castle to heal, to, get medical treatment, everything else like that. And then Kaido prepares to fight the Mink's forces. Or Kaido prepares to fight. And at that point in time, the scabbards tell, Rashi and Nekomamushi tell the Minks to head back inside as well. And now it's their time to fight Kaido. And, like, they've gone Sulong. The Minks had previously gone Sulong to fight against Jack's forces and everything like that as payback for what happened on Zou. And I think even Kaido's like, they deserve to have this fight. Let them have this fight given what you put them through on Zou. Type of a thing. So, now it's time for the Scabbards versus Kaido. And this is one of those, the Scabbards are throwing everything they have at Kaido. All their best moves, all their best, just everything. Raizo's grabbing the Boro Breath and the scrolls and just, sending it right back at Kaido. They're doing all of their different attacks on Kaido to just cause as much damage as possible. And, of course, Kaido is, of course, not holding back either. Not really. And sending his, attacks back at them. sending his attacks at them. And one of those, of course, results in one of his wind slice, like slices off Kiku's arm. Also, okay, so prior to that, we also know that Kaido, that Kinemon managed to slice Kaido's flames, and this also ends up like puts a cut in Kaido's mouth, which is just kind of funny. So yeah, and there's also where Kaido ends up, one of his wind scythe blades slices off Kiku's arm, and then the rest of the scabbards, like, they're not really hesitating. Kiku's like, okay, they like tie off the wound, left arm. They like tie off the wound, and then Kinemon comes over, lights his sword on fire, and then just cauterizes it right then and there. And Kaido's impressed with this. He's like, okay. He's like, okay, that's devotion. I'll give you that. There's also a few other things. There is a moment where Ashura, Kinemon, Denjiro, and Inarashi all end up using their Oden two-sword style attack to hit Kaido. And that does cause damage to Kaido. He feels like the pain and the scar that Oden left him, because they all hit the scar. I mean, like, it's a giant bullseye on him, in all honesty. And they all hit the scar. And that does cause Kaido some pain, and he does bleed. But he's not happy about it. And then, of course, after the incident with Kiku's arm, he ends up then shifting into his human form to then fight them that way, because he's like, okay, you've impressed me enough. I'll fight you in this form and not my dragon form. Unfortunately, we cut away, and by the time we cut back, all the scabbards are just laying there completely and utterly beaten, bloody, bruised, nearly dying, near death, all of that. And he is just like, he's like, okay, well, I guess they put up some type of a fight. And then by that point in time, Big Mom is also up there. And Kaido is using his flame clouds to lift Onigashima and to then slowly start moving it over to the Flower Capital, so we can drop it on the Flower Capital. To be fair, because, like, we know Kaido doesn't want his mansion to get destroyed. I don't expect it to have been his plan to just literally just drop it on Onigashima. I'm assuming his plan was to, like, slowly lower it as a way of, like, this would increase fear in the masses that are there for this, for the big fire festival and everything else like that, that he would just, like, Onigashima shows up and just slowly starts lowering itself onto the Flower Capital. And all of the citizens are just like, and then they just start scattering, running out of the Flower Capital as fast as they can. Which, of course, would cause panic, which would cause more fear and more panic and more fear and more panic, and lots of people would die in the process, probably. And then the Onigashima would just slowly lower itself down and land on top of the Flower Capital and squish a good chunk of the Flower Capital in the process, and citizens in the process. And a lot of them would flee out into, outside of the Flower Capital and into the other regions. And then it's just like, okay, well, your nice, cushy little place to live is gone. Now you're going to be working in the factories more. And if you don't like it, you're going to die anyway, essentially. Because that just seems like a more methodical and effed up way of doing this. And that's the way Kaido is. We also know that earlier on, when a few other things were happening when they were still on the live stage, we know that Yamato had shown up, and when Yamato and Luffy had shown up and were dealing with some stuff, that Yamato had found out that the cuffs from Kaido were genuinely exploding cuffs because they blew up when Luffy took them off. It's like, you're the worst dad ever. I'm like, Yeah, Kaido's definitely up there as one of the worst fathers in One Piece, um, by a long shot. Um, just given a lot of things, Kaido was definitely worse than Judge. Judge, at the very least, could never bring himself to actually kill Sanji. Um, I know there's the jokes about Tekking doing like a dad's tier list and a mom's tier list and everything else like that for like One Piece for all the characters, and I'd be like, there's some of those that would be like, yeah, those ones are definitely up there as bad parents, and then those ones are like more mediocre, and then those ones are just like awesome parents. Kaido would fall into the, yeah, no, he's bad, he's not a good parent. Kaido might land as like worst dad in the series, and then Estrid, given now what we know about Loki's backstory, might land as like worst mom in the series, even above Big Mom, who we're going to talk about now, because during this time frame, after Kaido has defeated the Scabbards, Lin, Big Mom, has made her way up and is also waiting on top of the on top of the castle after like having some skirmishes with like Nami and some other characters. Has made her way up to the top of the castle, top of the Skull Dome, and she's sitting there, and she's got Prometheus and Zeus, and like they're recharging on like some of Kaido's flame clouds and some other stuff, and they're just discussing what the plan is. And Kaido's like, or Big Mom's like, well, you know, you can destroy all of the Straw Hats, but make sure to leave Nico Robin. We need her. And Kaido's like, well, what about your daughter? Don't you like have her or something like that? Your three-eyed daughter. Which implies that Kaido knows about pudding. But I'm assuming this is either something to do with, like, Kaido has heard about Big Mom having a three-eyed daughter through his information network, which is quite possible, or Big Mom has mentioned it to him at some point in time during the last couple of days. And she's like, no, I'm not. I'm tired of waiting for her to awaken her third eye so she can read the poneglyphs. So I'll just capture Robin and make her do it for us. Which is, I mean, a decent plan, because then you also get all the other information that Robin has read off of the other poneglyphs, so you get that. So you get that, you know, as part of it. And so Kaido sends off the order to, you know, do, like, essentially his forces in Onigashima. That's just like, okay, yeah, capture, you know, you can kill all the rest of the Straw Hats. Remember to capture Nico Robin and make sure she's not too badly injured, just as long as she can still, you know, translate the poneglyphs and everything else like that. We're good. So they're up there just kind of waiting, and like Kaido's drinking while they're up here waiting and discussing stuff. And it's, you know, his, you know, explaining about like, yeah, we're gonna drop the Onigashima on the flower capital and everything else like that, as it still stands as a symbol of the Kozuki family. At that point in time, we have it that the worst generation members show up. Or in a moment we will. A Big Mom also inquires about a road poneglyph, which is of course the one that we know that is under Wano. And Kaido's like, yeah, you know, he's like, yeah, I know what you're thinking there, Lin. I'm not just gonna show it to you, type of thing. She doesn't know where it is. And everything else like that. So at this point in time, this is when we find out a little bit more about like their backstory. This is where about their time on the Rocks Pirates, where they mention, you know, yeah, we were on the Rocks crew together and everything else like that, and how they had more, like, Big Mom's like, I always used to look at you like you know, I considered you like a little brother to me and everything like that, and about the life debt that he owes her for giving him his devil fruit back on God Valley. And so we're kind of getting to see some of that. We get to see a little bit of their relationship, a little bit more of like just how their relationship works. You know, this, you know, big sister, little brother type of a relationship, which Kaido is kind of annoyed by. Also, I believe Big Mom is taller than Kaido by, I don't remember how much, but like a little bit. I believe she is taller than him. And so they're having that conversation. And then finally we have it that the worst generation make it to the roof. This would be Kid, Law, Zoro, and Killer arrive, and then Luffy also arrives. Luffy's the last one, and they all get up there, and they're like, looks like our next opponents essentially have arrived. And Luffy is just single-mindedly, he walks past them, doesn't even acknowledge Big Mom or Kaido, walks right past them, goes over to where Kinemon and the Scabbards are lying on the ground, just completely passed out, bloody, bruised, broken bones, all of it. Just walks right over to them, kind of, takes Kinemon in his arms, and he's like, don't worry, Kinemon, we'll take care of this, and, orders Law to teleport them out, and he does. And, Luffy just walked right past two frickin' Yonko that, just dwarf him so much in size. It's not even funny. And then Luffy pulls out a very impressive attack. He pulls out his Gear 3rd Red Rock, and he punches, it's like giant fist, and then he punches, and it actually does, it's powerful enough that it actually does cause Kaido to bleed, which shocks both Big Mom and Kaido. They're like, okay, that's impressive. Kaido, stunned by this at first, then regains his and strikes Luffy and attacks him with his Kanabo. Luffy manages to avoid this, and then it starts into this just big fight between the 5 Worst Generation members and 2 Yonko. And Kaido is still impressed that Luffy has actually gotten stronger over the past 2-ish weeks or so since their previous fight in Bakura Town. And how much Luffy has improved in that time frame. He is impressed by this, and that Luffy isn't going down so easily. So during this time frame, we of course have it that there's lots of attacks being traded back and forth. The Worst Generation members are unleashing various attacks on Kaido and Big Mom to try to injure them, obviously, and trying not to hurt each other. And kind of trying to work together and everything else like that. I mean, Kid and Killer are really good at working together because they're on the same crew and they're captain and, first mate and everything like that. Same thing with Luffy and Zoro. But, Law gets thrown into this mix, or, Kid and Zoro trying to work together isn't as cohesive. But they're all kind of, jumping around and, unleashing their various attacks and everything else like that. And while Big Mom is still hitting Luffy with some attacks, Luffy is more focusing on Kaido, and Kaido is a bit more focused on Luffy, but they're still, getting knocked around by each other and everything else like that. And they decide that that Big Mom and Kaido decide that they really want to see the strength of the 5 members of the Worst Generation, of these members here. To be fair, Kaido has 2 members of the Worst Generation on his crew, although one of them is a spy and one of them is a spineless coward. With Drake being the spy, obviously, and Apu being the spineless coward. And what ends up happening is they release this huge attack, this double power, double strength, Hikoku sovereignty type of a move that was this combo attack, and I'm assuming that they had done at various points in time. Back when they were on the on the Rocks Pirates. Roger Pirates. That would have been a completely different world if Kaido and Big Mom had been on the Roger Pirates. No, on the Rocks Pirates. That's when they were on the Rocks Pirates. That, they would have had this, combination attack there. The Rocks Pirates probably had a lot of very interesting combo attacks with each other and everything else like that. And what ends up happening is they release this attack on on the 5 members of the Worst Generation, and they survive it. I think a lot of them dodge it. This is not the one that Law, Luffy, and Kid are refusing to dodge out of just pure stupidity and pure stubbornness, but they manage to avoid these attacks. And then they release their own attacks back onto them, but Kaido transforms into his dragon form, so he's Big Mom is also floating on Prometheus and everything, so they're kind of in the sky, so they're a little more out of reach. And at this point in time, Kaido unleashes several of his wind blades onto the 5 of them, and they manage to avoid all the blades and everything. And then Luffy, of course, gets very close, and he uses his Gamu Gamu no Kong rifle that he strikes at Kaido with, which does injure him, which actually does injure Kaido. We then have this whole bit where Kid moves underneath Kaido and grabs his head with the big robot, one of the big mech ones that Kid makes, grabs Kaido with the robot and then like slams him into the ground onto the roof with his slam Gibson, which does again cause Kaido pain. It's enough of power. There's enough power in it that it bypasses his just like really thick dragon hide, and it does actually cause him pain. And from there, we of course have it that, Law is maneuvering around Kaido and like attacking him with, his gamma knife and everything else like that. So they're doing a lot of varying attacks here and there. Killer also uses his Kama Sonic, which is just like his Scythe, using his Scythe to attack Kaido from the inside. Again, this does cause Kaido some damage. And of course, they're also using what they can to try to separate Kaido and Big Mom, which eventually does result in Kid and Law working together to trap trap Zeus, and then knock Big Mom off of Onigashima so she falls and all that stuff. Is kind of what's all going on here. Luffy also uses his Rhino Schneider against Kaido to cause more damage, and everything else like that. So they're just going back and forth and back and forth. And then, of course, we have artwork. Is this where we have it? Not yet, but like they're going through, and Zoro's unleashing some of his attacks on Kaido as well, and Big Mom and everything else like that. And Kaido actually ends up having to dodge one of Zoro's attacks because of Enma, because he recognizes it as Odin's sword. And so we're going through a lot of that stuff. They're just going through so many different attacks, going back and forth between, one group and the next, and one group and the next, back and forth and back and forth. And eventually, they use this, or this one they use the Hikoku, the Heikai or whatever move. Eventually they end up using the double attack against the Worst Generation, which Zoro manages to block. But he gets very badly damaged, and part of the skull cone gets destroyed. Luffy does manage to attack Kaido several more times before eventually Luffy gets knocked out again because, he runs out of stamina because of his time limit in Gear 3rd. In Gear 4, excuse me. So, at this point in time, Big Mom is falling into the sea, and it's left down to Kaido and Zoro. And Zoro uses, I believe this is when he uses his Dead Man's Game, where it's Zoro has, unlocked his Conqueror's Haki, but he hasn't quite figured that out yet. And he uses this big attack against Kaido. And it does actually cause Kaido damage. And Kaido is just, he's, clutching at, where he got hit by Zoro. And it's Zoro using his Supreme Conqueror, his, Conqueror's Haki, combined with somehow pushing that into his swords. And one of those swords is Odin's old sword, and all that stuff. Plus, it's his, one of his Ashura forms, and it's this very, very strong attack for the Dead Man's Game. And hits Kaido. And Kaido gets hurt, and he is impressed by this. So eventually it ends up being, this is where Zoro gets hit too much, and Kaido and Law gets Zoro out of there. Eventually in this time frame, Luffy does wake up again, and we have it that him and Kaido are then fighting again. And Luffy again, it's he's figuring stuff out as he is fighting Kaido and Big Mom during this battle. We see Luffy kind of go up several levels essentially throughout the course of this battle, even when he's losing for part of it. He's still leveling up because he's learning more about I'm learning more about how I can fight Kaido, learning more about how to use the Ryuo techniques and everything else like that he has learned from Hirogoro during this time frame in Wano when they were at Udon prison. Udon prison, excuse me. So they're going through all of that. And eventually what ends up happening is, they're just going through so much of this. And, Kaido's trying to hit Luffy with his Kanabo, and Luffy keeps blocking it with, like, his sandals. And they've got, like, their conkers, hockey, clashing against each other as they fight, which is, of course, just messing with the weather all over the place around the island. And, they both get back up. They get knocked down, they get back up again. Insert song reference. And eventually what ends up happening is, of course, despite Luffy learning more about his new ability with, like, the Ryuo and more about using, like, putting his conquerors, hockey, and everything like that as part of his attacks with his punches and kicks and everything else like that with his attacks, Kaido does still manage to defeat him. And he knocks him off the roof and off the castle and everything like that, and off of Onigashima, and Luffy is falling into the water. And Kaido was just kind of regretting this because he was actually enjoying fighting Luffy. He was enjoying fighting Luffy because Kaido just likes to fight. Plus, he's upset because Luffy was not able to give him this clear, sure death. He also couldn't give Luffy a clear death either. And he states that Luffy couldn't be Joy Boy either. He says very cryptically, I guess you couldn't be Joy Boy either. And then he has, like, this is, of course, where, in the context of the story, this is where Luffy is falling, and Momonosuke ends up hearing Luffy's voice. They all think that, they're all worried about Luffy and everything else like that, but, Momonosuke does the announcement that, like, no, Luffy says he's not defeated yet, he's coming back, and he will defeat Kaido and everything else like that. So that's where we will end this one. Obviously why I had to break up Onigashima into 2 parts for this. So that's what I have for you here. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!